So hi everybody, this is a video that's going to cover a deep dive into the desktop GM-DC panel and also the secret functionality for an activity skill check. So on the screen here I have two instances of Fantasy Grounds. On the left it's the GM instance, on the right it's the player instance. The player has a couple of characters that they're controlling, Valeros and Ezrin, which I'll be using as part of this demo. And on the left-hand side, we can see some of the the GM setup. And the key thing is what I'm going to go through for the most of this video is this control down here. So this is new in release 19, and it's the where the GM can set the DC for an untargeted check. Now, what we mean by an untargeted check is when somebody's rolling against an assigned DC, be that a static DC or be that something that's level based, but because they're trying to identify an item that's a certain level, things like that. So basically, they're doing a check against a individual DC, not against a creature. So they're not targeting a creature's fortitude or reflex or perception or something like that. They're just going to need a DC that is set by the GM. Now, obviously, just like with most checks, the player can just make the check, and the DM can have the the DC in his mind. He might tell them, he might not, and they can work out things themselves. But a lot of the functionality now with the activities is to give feedback about the result of the activity and also take effects and other automation and things like that into account. So I think the best way to demonstrate this is actually by some examples. So the first one that I'm going to use is maybe Valeros is doing some climbing. So they go to their activities tab. The GM says, hey, make me a climb check, and they search for the climb activity. Now we can see here that we have all the various different information about the critical success, critical failure, examples of sample climb tasks, which also kind of map to a generic simple DC. So an expert will be wall with small handholds and footholds. So if that's the case, if somebody's climbing a wall that has small handholds and footholds, it would be an expert check, which if we look at the simple DCs over here, it's 20. So that would be an actual 20 there. Obviously, the GM doesn't need to set any of this. The player can just make that check. You just manually have a look. Okay, that's 21. That's a success. But what does a success actually mean? We can open that and say, okay, we move up across or safety down and increment 5 feet for 20 feet. So we can open it and we can work out what it is, or if we've climbed quite a few times in the past, we're probably quite familiar with it as well. But for those who actually want to have feedback, see exactly what they can do, all kind of built in to the system, then the GM can set the DC before they actually make the roll. Now this is briefly kind of covered in the how to use field down at the bottom of the activity, of the climb activity. The GM determines and assigns the DC before the check is made. This check doesn't use targeting. If you land prone, click the effect button to apply the prone condition to yourself. So we have a couple of actions here. We have the athletics check, which notice it's against a targeting that doesn't have any targeting because you don't perform a climb against a creature. And then if you do critically fail, you can click the effect button to apply that to yourself, just to apply that to you. That's critically failure. You fall. If you begin the climb on stable ground, you fall and land prone. Obviously, if you fall from higher up, you've got the chance to grab an edge or then get damage applied to you as you actually fall. But that would be covered outside of this particular activity. So let's have a look at that. So if the GM actually says, right, yeah, it's a DC 20, they can they can click that drop down. They can just click on the roll DC button and type 20 in if they want. They can do it different ways. So then the player does that check. You see the roll. It's an 11, which is a failure. Now there's actually no success level information for a failure. You just don't climb. You don't fall off, but you don't climb, anywhere further. Notice that the 20 is still in there, so the player can go, okay, I'll spend another action. 18, it's another failure. Okay, I'll spend my third action this round. Failure. Yeah, didn't get anywhere, unfortunately. I'll just reduce the DC of that so you can see, if they actually get a success. Yeah, sorry. So come on, Valeros. Work it out. Start climbing. So there you get a bit more information. Success, you move up across or safely down the incline for 5 feet per 20 feet of your land speed. Mostly 5 feet for most PCs. So yeah, you just get the feedback of that, so that everybody can see the full details of what you actually do. This can be especially handy as well for more complex activities that you may not use so often, so you can't remember exactly what they do. So looking at this DC panel down on the left-hand side here, this you can right-click on it, unlock it, and move it around on your screen. It's only available to the GM. It does allow you to, okay, they're doing a check against the level 2. They can type in that and it will set the DC. If it's, a rare level 2 item or creature or something like that, you can set the rarity as well. If you want to make it, okay, so it's a rare creature, but in this area, everybody knows about it, so I'm going to make it a very easy check. You can kind of put all those together to adjust the DC through here. So if you're, as a GM, you're very, very familiar with the DCs, you may just type it in there. You might not have to fill out all of these items, but it is just an encapsulation of the difficulty classes section of Chapter 10 of the core rules. So simple DCs, so you see it's untrained 10, legendaries 40. That's these guys in here. Level-based DCs, so it's a translation of this. So if we put in, if we clear this out completely, put in 0 in there, then you get a 14. If you put in 25, you should get a 50. So you do. So this translates through there. Note that there's different DCs for the level of a spell. So if we put in 8 for the level of a spell, we get 34. We don't get 24, which would be just a DC by level. The spell levels are different, and you see the difficulties as well there. So everything that's involved in setting the DC from Chapter 10 of the core rules is encapsulated into this control here. The control has to be this size because the way these drop-down controls work, they only open within the actual panel. If the panel was shorter, you wouldn't see all of them and you'd have to scroll through them. So I thought just having it this size, would be the best approach to displaying all of the information within the panel itself without having to scroll on, so you can set those DCs pretty quickly. Another nice piece of functionality of this is that if, say, somebody's doing a recall knowledge check against a creature, I've only got the core rules open here, so I just have hazards. So maybe somebody's trying to find something out about the Armageddon orb. The GM can drag the link for that bestiary entry, and it's going to populate the fields in there. So the Armageddon orb, it's at level 23, and it has the rare trait. So you can see it's put level 23 in the level section, and it's put the rare adjustment. So we see that it's a DC 51 for anybody trying to recall knowledge about this, or maybe a rogue trying to disable the trap, or something like that. It just sets that all up for you automatically there. As well, if somebody's maybe trying to identify a spell or something like that, you could drag a spell there. It's going to populate the spell level and give you a DC for that entry. So that's all going through there. Other things you can drag there is items. So maybe somebody's wanting to identify an item. So maybe there's a Yun stone. Drag that there. It's uncommon. So, but it's level 6, so it's put those in, and that gives you a DC of 24. So people can all use. The GM can very, very quickly set the DC based off the standard parameters of an object, that by dragging that to the desktop DC control panel. So just to go through as well, the That DC panel will be used if a check is set to target DC of none, so it takes it from there. And you could also override if you had a fixed DC, if you have something other than 0 in there, it will use that fixed DC. A good example of a fixed DC is treat wounds. Depending which, the expert, the legendary, or the master, or just the normal treat wounds. If you this has a fixed DC, but it's not kind of going against somebody's perception or something like that. So it would still use the DC in the GM's control when somebody makes the roll. So that's just something to keep in mind for the GM before somebody does treat ones. If you're not making it more difficult, maybe they don't have the full use of healer's tools, even though healer's tools is a requirement for this, I believe. Yeah, wearing or holding healer's tools, but maybe they have broken tools, or they're on the side of a mountain or in a stream or something like that, and you want to make it a little bit harder. You could say, okay, normally it's DC 15, but potentially I'm just going to make it 17. I'm going to make it a little bit harder there. And when that person makes their check, they then make that check against 17. You don't see it there, but because the DC is never shown to the players, obviously the GM can tell them what the DC is, but the DC is never shown to the players, even for non-secret checks. They don't know what their target is. Just like when they're attacking a creature, they don't know what their AC is. So the GM can kind of hard-code that, just to show you that it has actually changed. I'll just do manual dice entry just briefly for that check. So if I put it to 16, it should now fail. And it does. If I do 17 now, it should work, which it does, because the GM's got that set there. If they change it, if they clear it, then it should go back to the manual set DC of 15 within this skill use action. So those are the two times that the GM's DC panel will be used: if the target DC is fixed, or if the target DC is set to none. So the final thing that I want to go through as part of this is secret checks. So the secret trait specifically says that the GM makes the roll and the players and then adjudicates the result. So a good example of this is identify magic. So Ezran here, our wizard, identify magic, and maybe that the party's found something, maybe this stone that I mentioned from before. So the GM drags that down. Currently it'll be we probably have it unidentified, so they couldn't actually see it, but that doesn't have anything to do with this check. Ultimately, identify magic, so we know it's an exploration task. If we double click on the traits, we can see the traits that it has: concentrate, exploration, and secret. The GM rolls the check for this ability in secret. So normally, if you were face to face, you tell the GM, hey, I've got a bonus to this activity. My Arcana check has a bonus. You'd tell them what your Arcana is +7, and then the GM would make your check. But for Fantasy Grounds, you can just click the Identify Magic button. It's going to roll. Notice the player doesn't see the roll at all. It says, hey, you're doing Identify Magic Arcana, but they don't see a result of that roll. But on the GM side, they do. They see that it's a failure because it was 15 against a target of 24. And it reports that failure result. You failed to identify the magic and can't try again for 1 day. So the GM would report back, the result of that to the players. Obviously, there is the fact that a critical failure, you misidentify the magic as something else of the GM's choice. So the GM can then communicate back, hey, yeah, you've got this little stone, but you think it's something else, however the GM wants to actually handle that. The players don't see any result of that. They don't see what the DC is. They don't see the dice that they roll, and they don't see the result. So that's all kind of encapsulating that, and that's purely based off having the secret trait within that action there, just having that applied. So that's quite a good piece of functionality. So when the GM's getting people to identify stuff or recall knowledge. So a good example, like I said before, you could drag a trap and they can try and identify the trap or something like that, or identify a spell being cast. The GM can all set that, and these identify magic checks would be in secret, or just recall knowledge would be in secret as well. So recall knowledge, these are the various different skills you can use against it. So recall knowledge for nature also has the secret check, with the different critical success and critical failure results that would get displayed to the GM. So yeah, hopefully that's been of use to you, having this deep dive into non-targetable DC checks and also secret checks. And look out for more videos coming on the forum soon. Thank you.